games. I will give you the greatest games on earth.
Show them you can fight or die trying.
From the producers of 300.
A 4-horse race is a suicide.
Let the games begin!
Starring Oscar winner Anthony Hopkins.
Behold, this arena will be built for Rome.
Rise or die.
Those About to Die. A new Peacock original series streaming July 18th.
Welcome back to the third day in our terrifying trilogy of blizzard stories. The blizzard is the most fierce and unforgiving storm you will ever experience in winter. It is as punishing as it is relentless. And today was the Prairie Blizzard, worst in Canadian railway history. Hi, I'm Chris May, host of This Day in Weather History, a podcast from the Weather Network in Canada. On January 30th of 1947, a mighty blizzard steamrolled over all of southern Saskatchewan. It rendered it paralyzed, forcing the entire region to remain totally shut down. This day in weather history. The Great Saskatchewan Blizzard of 1947 hit an area where families are still getting to know each other after returning from World War II. There were also populations of displaced residents from Great Britain who were moved to the Canadian prairies as a result of the devastating blitzkrieg bombing of their country back home. Single mothers and fatherless children, all still trying to put the pieces back together again in a land so beautiful, but a land that winter loves to beat up on every year. And you're probably wondering, why am I featuring a story from January 30th today on February 8th? It is a good question. It was on this day in weather history when the Great Saskatchewan Blizzard of 1947 finally ended. You heard it right. Do the quick math. That was a 10-day blizzard. Remember that criteria that I keep dropping about the definition of a blizzard? Let's go over it again. A number of things must happen, 4 consecutive hours. 10 days is ridiculous. Southern Sask was effectively totally shut down through February 8th. And as I said earlier, Environment Canada called the storm the worst in Canadian railroad history. The snow piled up and then was blown all around, creating almost Middle Arabia-sized sand dunes made of snow. It was an impossible situation. The Regina Leader-Post newspaper tried everything to keep up with the news and updates for their readers, as the paper was back then the leading means for communication in those times. But after a while, even for them, it became too much. During the 10-day flight of this storm, the headline of this paper read on one of the days, "Province, just one big snowdrift." That was effectively the writer throwing up their hands, exclaiming, "That's it! I'm out! I got no more! This is insanity!" The snowdrifts blocked roads and rail lines from Calgary all the way to Winnipeg, my goodness. And some of that stayed in place until spring. In so many places, and because of that epic drifting I described a moment ago, only the tops of telephone poles, oh my gosh, were visible in some communities. And transportation to the province, of course, as I'd mentioned for about the third or fourth time now, was ground to a halt. No kidding. You could only see the tops of telephone poles. During the storm's life, on February 3rd, Regina set a North American record when temperatures dropped to negative 60 degrees Celsius. That is as close to the purest definition of salt in the wound as I think I could ever think of. You see, while homes and businesses will normally turn down the heat to conserve fuel, at that time mainly coal or oil, I suppose, municipal power plants were also forced to ration electricity with dim-outs, and city coal dealers borrowed army trucks for deliveries because they were the only vehicles that could successfully make it through this impossible mess. You got to know that Saskatchewan is well known for rough winters, and their citizens take pride in wearing that badge of tough resilience against this seasonal peril. However, having said that, many still consider the winter of 1947 to be the worst. Storms began just after Christmas and continued on and off for weeks. Hey, just a reminder that today's episode is accompanied by a podcast video short. You can watch this 2-minute version of today's story on television on the Weather Network in Canada or online anywhere you are at theweathernetwork.com/weather history. They're shot right here in my podcast recording studio and include photos and video from when all this snow fell and what it looked like during and after it happened. Then after you listen to the rest of this episode, be sure to go on there and check the podcast video short. Back now to the human toll. Food and other necessary supplies in and out of the region slowed to a trickle. Home delivery was impossible, and people were forced to struggle through the high drifts and accumulation piles of snow just to make it to central supply depots for their milk and other groceries. And the intense record-setting cold put a massive strain on the already depleted coal supplies. For farmers, it was a whole different hell. Locals told the tale of a farmer who had no other option but to feed his chickens by tossing grain down the coop chimney, while another was said to have cut a hole in his barn roof to keep his cattle fed. Then, with the massive accumulation and even higher drifts, others had to dig snow tunnels to get from the home to the shed in these conditions. Believe it or not, it got worse. The food and coal supplies began to dwindle, so some towns organized emergency overland trips to retrieve shipments that were grounded at train depots up the line. But they only had sleds, and the blizzard that was still tearing things up made that idea as dangerous as it was impossible. 10 days after it started, this day in weather history. Tomorrow is February 9th, and now that our terrifying trilogy of blizzards is over, we move stealthily on to a powerful winter storm of a different feather, the 1969 nor'easter that affected the mid-Atlantic and New England regions between February 8th and 10th. We pick it up right in the middle on this day in weather history with me, your host, Chris May.